Following the description of Berlioz's horrible death, the listener made a puzzling remark, and his eyes flashed with hatred. I'm just sorry that it wasn't Latunsky, the critic, or that hack, Mstislav Lavrovich, instead of Berlioz. And in a frenzy, but noiselessly, he exclaimed, "Go on." The cat who paid his fare was a big hit with the guest, and he choked with silent laughter after he watched Ivan, excited by the success of his storytelling, jump down on his haunches and pantomime the cat, holding a coin up to his whiskers. And so, Ivan concluded, after telling about the events at Griboyedov and again becoming gloomy and sad, that's how I wound up here. The guest laid a sympathetic hand on the poor poet's shoulder and said, "Unhappy poet. But you, dear fellow, brought it all on yourself. You shouldn't have acted so carelessly, even rudely with him. Now you're paying the price. Why, you should be grateful you got off relatively cheaply." "But who was he, anyway?" asked Ivan, shaking his fists in agitation. The guest stared at Ivan and answered with a question. "You're not going to get all upset now, are you? All of us here are unstable. There won't be any calls for the doctor or injections or other stuff like that, will there?" "No, no," exclaimed Ivan. "Just tell me who he is." "All right, then," replied the guest, weighing his words and speaking distinctly. "Yesterday at Patriarch's Ponds, you had a meeting with Satan. As he had promised, Ivan did not go berserk, but he was nevertheless totally flabbergasted. "That can't be. He doesn't exist." "I beg your pardon. You're the last person in the world who should say such a thing. You were obviously one of the first ones to suffer at his hands. And here you are, as you very well know, in a mental hospital, and yet you still claim that he doesn't exist. I find that really rather strange." Completely befuddled, Ivan fell silent. "As soon as you began describing him," the guest continued, "I guessed who it was you had the pleasure of conversing with yesterday. And I'm really surprised at Berlioz. You, of course, are still an innocent." Here the guest again apologized. "But he, at least, from what I've heard, had read a thing or two. The very first words the professor spoke confirmed all my suspicions. It's impossible not to recognize him, my friend. And besides, forgive me for saying so, you're, if I'm not mistaken, an ignorant man, are you not?" "Absolutely," agreed the now unrecognizable Ivan. "So, there, you see. Why, even the face you described. The dissimilar eyes, the eyebrows. By the way, forgive me, but you probably haven't even heard the opera Faust, have you?" Ivan became terribly, strangely embarrassed for some reason, and with a flushed face started mumbling something about a trip to a sanitarium in Yalta. There you are. It's not surprising. But Berlioz, I repeat, amazes me. He's not only very well read, he's also very shrewd. Although I must say in his defense that Voland could certainly pull the wool over the eyes of someone far shrewder than he. "What?" Ivan shouted out in return. "Quiet!" Ivan slapped himself on the forehead and said in a croak, Now I understand. He had the letter W on his visiting card." "Well, I'll be, so that's how it is." He fell into a state of befuddled silence for a while, gazing out at the moon floating beyond the window grill. And then he said, "So that means he really could have been with Pontius Pilate, doesn't it? Since he was already born then, right?" "And they call me a madman," Ivan added, pointing in outrage at the door. A bitter grimace distorted the guest's mouth. "Let's look truth straight in the eye, said the guest, turning his face toward the nocturnal orb passing through the clouds beyond the window grill. You and I are both mad. There's no denying it. You see, he shook you up, and you lost your mind because you obviously had tendencies in that direction to begin with. But there's no doubt at all that what you told me really did happen. But it's so bizarre that even a psychiatrist of genius, like Stravinsky, naturally didn't believe you. Was he the one who examined you? Yvonne nodded. The man you conversed with was at Pilot's, and he was also at Kant's for breakfast, and now he's paying a visit to Moscow. Yes, and the devil only knows what mischief he'll do here. Should we try and catch him? Said the not entirely suppressed old Ivan, rearing his head from inside the new one, although without much confidence. You already tried, and look where it got you, was the guest's ironic response. I wouldn't advise others to try it either, but rest assured that he'll cause more trouble. Oh, how annoying it is that you were the one to meet him and not I, even though I'm all burnt out and the coals have turned to ash. I swear, I would have given up Praskovia Fyodorovna's keys for a meeting like that. And they're all I have to give up. I'm a poor man. But what do you need him for? The guest was sad for a long time, and his face twitched. But finally he said, You see, strangely enough, I'm in here for the same reason you are, namely, because of Pontius Pilate. Here the guest looked around anxiously and said, The fact is that a year ago, I wrote a novel about Pilate. You're a writer? Asked the poet with interest. The guest's face darkened and he shook his fist at Ivan and then said, I am the master. He became stern, reached into the pocket of his robe, and took out a grimy black cap that had the letter M embroidered on it in yellow silk. He put the cap on and modeled it for Yvonne in profile and full face in order to prove that he was the master. She sewed this for me with her own hands, he added mysteriously.